Egmont. After question period today, the House may well give unanimous consent to move from private members' business to deal with government business. If that is the case, we will probably be going to second reading of bills. At the moment, there are 6 bills at second reading stage, 21 at Committee of the Whole stage, 15 at third reading stage, and 1 is awaiting royal assent. This afternoon, if the House does deal with government business, Bill 60, the Languages Act, should be up for second reading. If the House does not give consent to move to government business, then the motion to be discussed is the one as proposed by the member for Chinook, Mrs. McClellan, dealing with volunteer teacher internship programs. The House will again set this evening and probably go on till at least midnight dealing with second readings of bills, Committee of the Whole, or third reading stage. Today, the House sets a new record for the longest sitting in Alberta's history. Let us pray. We give thanks to God for the rich heritage of this province as found in our people. We pray that native-born Albertans and those who have come from other places may continue to work together to preserve and enlarge the precious heritage called Alberta. Amen.
Introduction of visitors. Presenting petitions. Reading and receiving petitions. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. Notices of motions.
Mr. Speaker, pursuant to Standing Order 21, I wish to give notice that I intend to move when Bill 21 is called for resumption of debate at third reading, that debate on the bill shall not be further adjourned. And Mr. Speaker, pursuant to the same Standing Order 21, I wish to give notice that I intend to move when Bill 22 is called for resumption of debate at third reading, that debate on the bill shall not be further adjourned.
Clerk. Bakerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give notice of my intention to move at the conclusion of routine orders today the following motions. Be it resolved that the Legislative Assembly commend the Edmonton Journal for the innovative decision to print its newspapers with ink manufactured from canola oil that is produced and processed in Alberta, thereby providing much-needed support to farm families in this province, diversifying the markets for Alberta's agricultural industry, and engaging in an effective program of import substitution. I have copies here.
Under what standing order?
40, Mr. Speaker, pardon me.
Order 40. Okay.
Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion that's quite appropriate now, that I intend to move at third reading of Bill 21, the annual review of the minimum wage and its indexation to the inflation rate. I have copies here for all members.
I rise to give oral notice of amending motion that I intend to move at third reading of Bill 21, urging that Alberta families be strengthened through extending the bill's parental leave provisions. I have copies here for all members. And as well, Mr. Speaker, I wish to give oral notice of an amending motion I intend to move at third reading of Bill 22, seeking a reconsideration of those bill's provisions dealing with picketing and boycotts, that both may be more freely allowed. And again, I have copies for all members.
Bergerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion I intend to move at third reading of Bill 21, urging that the bill's coverage be extended to include employees of a farm or ranch employing 20 or more employees. I have copies here for all members.
Edmonton, Beverly.
Only way we can do it.
That's right.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion. I intend to move a third reading of Bill 22, urging the decertification powers of the Lieutenant Governor and Council not have effect until such time as the parties involved have pursued the matter as far as they wish in the courts, and this Assembly has by resolution approved the order. I have copies for all members here.
Member for Edmonton, Strathcona.
Mr. Chairman, Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion I intend to move at third reading of Bill 21, urging that overtime rates paid to employees be double the normal pay rate. I have copies for all members.
Member for Calgary Mountain View.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion I intend to move at third reading of Bill 22, urging that informal board hearings be without prejudice to either party's rights to pursue further remedies. I have copies for all members.
Edmonton, Avonmore.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of a motion that amending motion that I wish to move on third reading of Bill 22 that would stipulate the continuation of previously effective collective agreement terms governing pay, conditions of employment, and the rights and privileges of employees.
Westlock Sturgeon.
Speaker, I rise to give oral notice that intend to move a motion amending Bill 22 on third reading that would be refer the bill back to the Committee of the Whole for consideration of the amendment to provide that Part 2.1 not be proclaimed and enforced before the end of the fall sittings of the 88th session of the Legislature, January 1st, 1989. I have copies for everyone.
Edmonton, Calder.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion I wish to move at third reading on Bill 22, urging that the Labour Relations Board be empowered to impose a first contract under certain circumstances, and I have copies.
Edmonton, Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion that I intend to move at third reading of Bill 22, urging that an application to revoke a trade union's bargaining rights, if it originates with a party other than the bargaining unit employees, must be approved by Lieutenant Governor and Council before it takes effect, and I have copies here for all members.
Athabasca-Lac-La-Biche.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion. I intend to move a third reading of Bill 22, urging that the bill's coverage be extended to include employees of a farm or ranch employing 20 or more employees. I have copies here for all members.
Edmonton, Belmont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to give oral notice of an amending motion. I intend to move a third reading of Bill 22, urging that the Labour Relations Board be empowered to certify a bargaining agent automatically in instances where employers have violated the bill during an organizing drive. As well, Mr. Speaker, I wish to give oral notice of an amending motion that I intend to move at third reading of Bill 21, urging that the annual vacation entitlement normally accorded to employees be extended. Again, I have copies for all members of the Assembly.
Edmonton, Kingsway.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I wish to give oral notice of an amending motion for the third reading of Bill 22. I intend to move that the use of replacement workers by employers during a strike or lockout be prohibited.
Member for Calgary Forest Lawn.
Mr. Speaker, I give rise to give oral notice of an amending motion I intend to move at third reading of Bill 22, urging that spin-off companies not be permitted to escape the parent company's collective agreements. I have copies for all members.
Anyone else? No one else?
Introduction of bills.
The Chair would just point out that having received a few notices here, that the Chair will review the amendments
because they've been submitted doesn't necessarily mean that they're all in order. Just a reminder to the House. Clerk, please.
Introduction of bills. Tabling returns and reports.
The Attorney General. Mr. Speaker, I wish to file with the Assembly copies of the question and answer document relating to the Canada-United States Free Trade Agreement. Copies will be made available to all members of the Assembly for wide distribution. Government House Leader.
Mr. Speaker, I wish to table response to written question number 205 by the Honourable Member for Westlock Sturgeon.
Minister of Career Development and Employment.
Mr. Speaker, I rise to table response to question number 206.
Introduction of special guests.
Member for Edmonton Mill Woods.
Mr. Speaker, I'm pleased to introduce to you and the other members of the House this afternoon Dr. Mustafa Abdullah from Fort Vermilion, whose case I raised in the legislature earlier this month regarding difficulties in gaining access to an internship. Dr. Abdullah is looking forward to meeting soon with the Minister of Hospitals and Medical Care to further discuss the barriers he's facing in trying to serve the residents of that northern Alberta community. I'd like him to stand now and receive the warm welcome of the House.
Ministerial statements. Oral question period.
Mr. Speaker, to the Premier. Mr. Speaker, the Legislative Assembly is currently in the final stage of debate on two of the most important bills facing working people in this province. Mr. Speaker, in the final stage, debate has consisted of 35 minutes on Bill 22 and 55 minutes on Bill 21. Today, Mr. Speaker, we have a House Leader announcing closure again. And now seems that any amount of debate on these two bills is too much debate for the government. And my question is simply this to the Premier. Why is it that the only way people representing ordinary working families can avoid closure on this bill is to surrender right to debate completely?
Well, Mr. Speaker, clearly the Honourable Leader of the Opposition is incorrect. These bills have had more time in this legislature than any legislation in the history of Alberta. Now, the members may have mishandled the way they used their time, but that's their fault, not the government's. I had the document before us the other day. It happens to be here again today. This document is pages and pages and pages and pages of debate on these bills. The Honourable Leader of the Opposition should have thought about how he was going to deal with it rather than merely wasting time and also running about or having members of his caucus run about saying one thing we're going to do is not allow those bills to pass. Clearly, that's the ultimate arrogance towards a legislature.
Speaker.
You call closure not ultimate arrogance?
Mr. Speaker, the ultimate arrogance of this legislature is this Premier who doesn't believe in democracy.
Got that right.
Doesn't believe in democracy.
Why don't you quit? Just
Mr.
resign,
Speaker,
John.
two of these major bills, and I asked this Premier, he can talk about this being thicker than the phone book. The only thing thicker is his head, Mr. Speaker. Now, Mr. Speaker, there was 35 minutes on one bill and 55 in another. And that's what I'm asking. Is this Premier saying that's enough debate on two of these major bills that affect all the working people in the province?
As usual, Mr. Speaker, when the Honourable Member has a very weak position, he tries to get into personal comments or raise his voice, which frankly, Mr. Speaker, he is trying to cover up from the fact that he mismanaged the time of the House. Right. It's obvious, Mr. Speaker, when you set out to just delay and prevent legislation from being passed, that future and past parliamentarians have anticipated this. And the fact is that they have put in place a procedure that deals with it. Now, the honourable members have every right.
Thank you. Thank you. This is question period. We still need to hear the answers as well as the questions, Honourable Premier.
The honourable members have every right to conduct the style of delay and stall that they have. But the legislatures over history have provided for a way to deal with it, and the government are. If the people of Alberta had wanted to have a couple of pieces of legislation that were socialistic pieces of legislation, they'd have elected socialists. They did not elect socialists. They elected this government. The government has taken 2 years to talk to people, to prepare major pieces of labor legislation, and now, in a responsible way, the government has the responsibility to proceed with them. The members can talk and yell all they want. That's the fact of the legislature moving.
Abuse, John, abuse. This undemocratic, autocratic premier talked about history, Mr. Speaker. This is the first time in the history of our province in which closure has been invoked by a government at all 3 stages of a bill, and I expect, Mr. Speaker, it's the first time in the history of Canada, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, and it's probably the first time that it's been brought in after less than an hour of debate. Now, my question is, because these are important bills to this Premier, will the Premier explain how this confrontational style of his can possibly lead to improved labor relations in the province?
Well, first of all, Mr. Speaker, I come back to say to everybody that the legislature has taken a great deal of time on these bills. The bills were presented to the House on April the 15th. The bill, that's a result of being laid over from the year before when the bills were presented to the House, and before that a year of discussion. And Mr. Speaker, we then have the legislation placed before the House. The honourable members decide that they will do something that hasn't been done in Alberta before, and that is that they, they're having kind of a bad session, I admit it. So they try So they get extreme. So they get extreme and they try to stall the business of the House. Well, legislatures over the years have looked ahead and provided for this, and the government is then following what a responsible government should do. This legislation provides a balanced playing field for labor negotiations in the future. This labor legislation allows management and labor to negotiate on a level field and work out the negotiations between themselves and enter into contracts. That's the kind of legislation the people of Alberta want, and that's the kind of legislation that is coming through this legislature.
And Parkinson wants, you mean?
Obviously, the Premier refuses to answer the question because he can't. He knows it's unheard of in Canada to do what they're doing.
The problem is still it's inappropriate parliamentary to comment on the answer. Final supplementary.
Still, Mr. Speaker, people on...
Thank you very much for the big deal comment. Perhaps the final supplementary.
Sure. The point that I want to make is it's unheard of in Canada, Mr. Speaker, on democratic process to take away workers' rights, Mr. Speaker, and I want this Premier to answer the question for once, Mr. Speaker. Will the Premier explain how he can possibly expect his new labor relations regime to be successful in the workplace in the face of such sleazy tactics?
Here. In this session, we've already had the word sleazy withdrawn at least once by the honourable member from Mill Woods. Perhaps you could change your adjectives.
Mr. Speaker, surely we have to base it on something.
Right.
Mr. Speaker, again, the honourable member draws up all this indignation when, in fact, he's really covering for the performance of himself and his caucus in the legislature. They have badly mismanaged their time, badly misjudged the public, badly misjudged the government, and we have presented legislation that will provide the base for future in Alberta for negotiations on a responsible basis between management and labor. Now, everybody knows that party and this opposition have no interest in having smooth labor relations in Alberta. I mean, they run around following the policies of their pal, Mr. Whirland, just looking for upsetting labor relations. We've seen that before. What they don't like about this legislation is it provides for negotiation and it provides for fewer strikes in this province and more consultation. And they don't even have the guts or the nerve to sit there and listen to an answer when they themselves ask the question.
The member for Westlock Sturgeon supplementary, followed by Calgary McCall.
Mr. Speaker, if I may, also supplementary to the Premier, I think the public is indignant too. It's not only the opposition, but Mr. Speaker, we've been subjected to 63 bills in this session, probably one of the heaviest and most crowded going. What is the real reason for trying to use closure now? Is it that he's trying to get out of having a fall session and sweep these contentious issues under the rug as soon as possible? Isn't that what he's afraid of a fall session?
Mr. Speaker, we're not trying to do anything as quickly as possible. It's taken 2 years. Well, what kind of nonsense for the honourable member to say we're trying to deal with these things quickly? First of all, we're established into the longest session in the history of Alberta, and we have the longest time spent on bills in the history of Alberta, and so they look very foolish standing up saying that we're rushing this. Neither party is interested in having legislation go forward which is going to establish a new sound basis for labor negotiation in Alberta. They prefer, and we've watched it, they prefer to have labor unrest. Well, it's not going to happen under this new legislation, and that's too bad.
All right, Calgary Mountain View. Calgary Mountain View. He's made the statement twice. Are you prepared to stand and retract?
Mr. Speaker, the Premier's statement is untrue when he's describing our position.
Does the honourable member withdraw the original statements? I didn't hear it. Did he do it?
Mr. Speaker, I said that what the Premier had said was not our position. It was untrue, and I would withdraw the statement that he had, in fact, made a lie.
Calgary McCall.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I won't get into any sleazy comments. Mr. Speaker,
Thank you, honourable member, and you just withdrawn that word, that adjective, haven't you?
Certainly, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, question to either the Premier or the member.
Thank you.
Could the Minister tell us in some exacting time what amount of time in hours has been given for the complete debate on Bills 21 and 22? That includes first, second reading, and committee study, and at the cost of this nonsense to the taxpayer.
Order. Mr. Speaker, the greatest precision that I can give is that the debate on the bills has extended in excess of 41 hours. The pages in Hansard are somewhere, I believe, between 245 and 255 pages at this point. There will, of course, be some additional debate.
second main question, Leader of the Opposition.
To the provincial treasurer, Mr. Speaker.
Democratic Dick.
Mr. Speaker, yeah, Democratic Dick. I'm sure we'll get better answers than we do from, what's his name? Mr. Speaker, the treasurer made certain comments recently in the course of justifying the government's latest borrowing bills, Mr. Speaker, which I point out brings direct government debt up to $7.5 billion. Mr. Speaker, in the course of these comments to the legislature, the treasurer indicated he expected the deficit on the general fund to be in the range of $800 to $900 million, compared to, I point out, $670 million in the budget, and he also indicated a capital fund requirement of some $300 million, up from $225 million. My question to the treasurer, Mr. Speaker, is this. Will the treasurer explain why we are less than 3 months into the budget year and the deficit is already mushroomed by some $200 to $300 million by the treasurer's own account?
Mr. Speaker, I'll try to provide a calm and reasoned reply so that the member from across the way has an opportunity to follow the fiscal plan, which I might say, in terms of time of this legislative assembly, certainly has been carefully examined. Mr. Speaker, when I talked about the borrowing requirements, I think it is well understood that the increase in the funds required by the province to $7.5 billion from $6.5 billion includes two major funds that the province operates, the General Revenue Fund and the Capital Fund. And from time to time, Mr. Speaker, instead of being precise in terms of the dollars that are reflected in our bottom line, we tend to use general numbers. In terms of both funds, Mr. Speaker, it is the deficit that of around $900 million that is referred to, and of course it is those dollars, Mr. Speaker, that we'll be borrowing for. I also went on to say, Mr. Speaker, that this would allow us some comfort that we don't expect to use the full amount of the $7.5 billion, but as prudent managers of the resources of this province and having a forward-looking attitude to managing the fiscal plan of this province, we want to have that opportunity to move to that level. I should say, Mr. Speaker, specifically that at this point in the fiscal plan, I don't see any major problems with the projected deficit. It is below our targeted forecast of last year by $200 million.
We just understand the treasurer made just a little mistake in the way he reported Mr. Mistake. We thought that was the case. But, Mr. Speaker, to go into this in more detail, Mr. Speaker, the government's budget was based on oil at $18.50 per barrel. I would point out, Mr. Speaker, to the treasurer, so far it's averaged around $16.36, and it's currently trading even lower, around $15.76 today. My question is, Mr. Speaker, is the treasurer building a revised average price for oil into any revised budget figures? And if so, what is that figure at this time?
Again, Mr. Speaker, that's a very reasonable question, and I think in the context of what has happened in the marketplace, obviously our forecast of $18.50 oil when the New York mercantile market is now trading below $17 over the past few weeks would raise the question, what is the reliability of your revenue forecasts? As I've said before, Mr. Speaker, the fact is we put that forecast out there, that $18.50 forecast out there, so the people of Alberta can appreciate the kinds of difficulties that Alberta has because much of our revenue is driven by the world changes in oil and gas prices. But it doesn't mean, Mr. Speaker, as I said in the earlier response, that I am yet concerned about our forecast position. Mr. Speaker, you should know that the $18.50 forecast is both a composite index, one that reflects not just the value of oil prices to the province of Alberta, but also reflects the price of natural gas going into that very lucrative and strongly forecast strong market in the United States. And so we have to go until March 31st, 1989, Mr. Speaker. And over that period, you will see firmness come back to the price, and you will see a very strong market develop, as the Minister of Energy has reported, in the United States market. And so we are very optimistic that the price will become fairly close to what we're forecasting. We believe the revenue forecast on oil and natural gas is fairly accurate. It's also reinforced by the oil plays generally, Mr. Speaker. But if I was to say that it was an infallible comment, that would be wrong, of course. We do make mistakes, obviously. We're the first to admit it. And because we're speaking to the people of Alberta right now and saying to them, here's the best we can do. Reflects the composite view, reflects the best information we have from the departments, from the private sector, and we're giving that information to the people of Alberta so they, along with us, can judge the problems we have in terms of establishing the fiscal plan. I should say, Mr. Speaker, that at least we have a plan. At least we take determination to focus in on the problem we have and size the deficit, and we are controlling the size of our expenditures, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, the Treasurer may want to see things through rose-colored glasses, but a lot of forecasters would disagree with them at this particular time because the price is actually going down. At this point, it's not $17, it's $15.76 today. But, Mr. Speaker, let me throw this out, Mr. Speaker. I think the deficit could be greater, but in lieu of the Treasurer now admitting that the possibility is at least there that the deficit could be higher and much higher than he projected, Mr. Speaker, in March, would the Treasurer, though, assure the Assembly that essential services such as health care and education will not be cut next year to meet some arbitrary guideline in terms of the budget deficit that he talks about?
First of all, Mr. Speaker, let me be clear what it is, in fact, I did say. I've been trying to go fairly slowly here so the member can understand the issues. First of all, Mr. Speaker, I have not said that the deficit will necessarily increase. I have indicated clearly, Mr. Speaker, that in terms of forecasting oil and gas prices, they are subject to a range of confidence intervals, if you like. That is, it could be up or it could be below it. But that doesn't mean necessarily, Mr. Speaker, that the rest of the revenues of the province will in any way should be expected to drift down. In fact, Mr. Speaker, the corporate tax levels are expected to drift up, Mr. Speaker, and therefore, in terms of a compromise between oil and gas revenues and other taxation revenues, they may in fact balance out. And what we have also said, Mr. Speaker, is that we are doing our darndest to ensure that those high priorities that we outlined in our budget address will be carried through. We've shown already our commitment to education, to hospitals. Historically, over the past year, we have shown that we are a caring government, one which provides for those people who are in difficulty. We have also shown, Mr. Speaker, in terms of the tax regime itself, that we've taken additional Albertans off the tax schedule, not just by the selective tax reduction, but by also reducing income taxes, Mr. Speaker, and maintaining that very clear principle that is so important to us in this Conservative government, that there will not be a sales tax in this province, and that's an easy point to communicate, Mr. Speaker.
Mr. Speaker, I do not recall asking about a sales tax, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, recognizing that I know it's very hard to forecast, but I'm saying that there may be some difficulty with the forecast that was already there, which could lead to a deficit, and the Premier or the Treasurer has acknowledged that could happen, Mr. Speaker. All other things being equal. All I want from him is not to talk about the past, because they did cut $1 billion 2 years ago, and they did cut back, and I'm asking for assurances that in this next year, next March, that they will not do that if the deficit's slightly higher than they anticipated.
Well, Mr. Speaker, I know the tone and theme of the party, the NDP party across the way, develops its strength and its character around the doomsayer's philosophy, Mr. Speaker. There's no question about that, that if it's not negative and not bad and not dour, then they're not happy, Mr. Speaker. Well, that's not the resolve that this government has. We're optimistic. We can see new investment flowing into this province at a high rate. We can see the unemployment numbers dropping off, Mr. Speaker, and we can see real economic growth coming back to the province. The future lies ahead for us on a very positive note, Mr. Speaker. We believe in it. We're going to ensure it happens, and we're providing the government to ensure that it takes place in this province.
Edmonton Meadowlark. Edmonton Meadowlark, not Begerville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Dollar up, oil down, deficit up. Is the government reassessing financial commitments to mega energy projects in this province?
Yes, Mr. Speaker, we are very firm in our belief that a variety of investments are necessary in this province to ensure diversification takes place. Over the past few weeks and few months, many of my colleagues, the Premier, the Minister of Energy, and others have been devoting a lot of effort to ensure that the great economic future which is ours in this province will come to us built on the natural strengths that we have. Together with the diversification which is already taking place, Mr. Speaker, we're ensuring that oil and natural gas will be driven by new investment in this province. Yes, the province will take a role where necessary, as we have traditionally done. We'll ensure that other kinds of investment takes place in this province, because we do have an economic regime that is attractive to the private sector. good government mixed in there is an important ingredient, Mr. Speaker. And that, Mr. Speaker, is the kind of profile that we have taken. We've explained it to the people of Alberta. We'll continue to ensure that economic growth takes place here as a result of private sector activity. And that's the mandate we were elected on, and that's the promise we will continue with, Mr. Speaker.
Red Deer North.
Supplementary to the Treasurer, the Liberal NDP doom and gloomers were shrieking over a year ago that we would not meet the deficit projections of the 87 budget. Could the Minister please jog our memories and inform us if indeed the 1987 deficit projections were met?
A very excellent question, Mr. Speaker. That shows the way... And I know the socialists know that the fiscal plan is working. That's why they support what we have done. In fact, you have seen, Mr. Speaker, that our forecast, moving from an aggregate deficit of $4 billion to reduced deficit last year of just over $1 billion, has shown the kinds of performance and determination we have to deal with the deficit. We explain that to the people of Alberta, Mr. Speaker, and on a wide mandate, they agree. Do not leave a legacy of debt to future generations. Tighten the ship up, be good managers, and get on with making this province a great place to reside. And we're doing just that.
Westlock Sturgeon, main question.
Mr. Speaker, my main question today is to the Premier. It concerns the thousands of Canadian farmers, Mr. Speaker, have left the farms in Alberta, and in Alberta it may be only in the hundreds, but still very many. And a large part of it, Mr. Speaker, because of been forced off the land by the rather heartless and stupid policies of this government when it comes to foreclosing. The government has announced a plan, Mr. Speaker, a program which will provide farm management assistance to debt-ridden farmers, but besides it focuses only on farm financial stress and is being administered by the very department that's causing most of the stress in the minds of the people, that is the Agricultural Development Corporation. To the Premier, why is the program focused solely on financial management and not on other adjustments?
Mr. Speaker, I'll ask the Minister of Agriculture to deal with the question, except to say to the honourable member that he's obviously responding to some media reports about the number of people leaving farm employment. And it's clear, Mr. Speaker, that while there were something like 10 times as much leaving other parts of Canada than Alberta, we have to accept the fact that there are some cases where everyone will not stay in any industry in any province. Nevertheless, in Alberta, our farmers and our rural towns and communities get the greatest level of assistance from this government than any government in Canada. It's not just in the area of reducing costs of money, but it's reducing costs of energy, reducing costs of fertilizer, helping to build strong, viable communities. All of these things are a part of creating an atmosphere and attitude, if you like, that this government is committed to the family farm and into the strength of agricultural economy in Alberta.
Mr. Speaker, it's in reference, maybe I didn't phrase my question well enough, was the family stress, which I'm sure the Premier is most interested in. These people, many people are losing their farms, losing homes that they've had for generations. Would he not consider expanding the program of management, of consulting and advice to the farm families that are in traditional stage or transitional stage to cover the whole aspects of alcoholism, suicide, the whole stress on the family of moving from one major industry into another occupation entirely?
Mr. Speaker, that type of counseling is available to all Albertans. If the honourable member has some specific program he's interested in, he could spell it out in more detail for me, either in the House or out of the legislature, and I would consider it.
The fact of the matter, though, Mr. Speaker, supplementary, is that they've voted $300,000 only, and it's to give financial management. But we have a crisis in our rural families. If the Premier would get out and tour the province, you understand that. And we're not putting the money and the consultant in that. Could the Premier say, for instance, how much of the $300,000, the measly $300,000, is going to be budgeted for social consulting and advice to the farm families that are losing their homes and their livelihood.
Obviously, Mr. Speaker, it's impossible to pinpoint an exact amount of money, except to say that the Honourable Leader of the Liberal Party continues to express such a negative view of the capacity and the strengths of the rural people and farm families in this province. One of the things that the government is doing is strengthening this part of our economy, the agricultural sector of our economy, trying to again attract people into lending money in this area, to have companies come and invest in farm implement operations. All of these things, while we're doing it and have to have a positive attitude when you're doing that, the honourable member goes about knocking rural Alberta and knocking our farm economy. Exactly the opposite that should be done to help our farmers.
Mr. Speaker, there's nothing wrong with the farm economy that a change in government wouldn't cure. There's no question there. But the question, Mr. Speaker, maybe I'll move the supplement over to the Associate Minister of Agriculture. Would the Minister consider expanding the program that now involves only financial counselling to try to cure some of the faults that her own department has caused, to cover the social aspects and the rehabilitation aspects of these farmers that are being forced off their land, being squeezed out of their occupation and their lifestyle?
Mr. Speaker, the beauty of the new amalgamated financial program between Alberta Agriculture and ADC is that we do have flexibility. The $300,000 that's in that program is above the services that we already have. And one of the aspects of the program is that the DHEs or the DAs or the Alberta loans officers who may be the first initial contact. Will you just listen and quit chewing that cud all the time? How'd you like to listen? The aspect of it, the program will do exactly what the member is asking for. The people in Alberta Agriculture and in ADC under this program are able to call in special services if they're necessary and would be of some help to the farmer.
Thank you. You've had your 4 questions, Honourable Member. Athabasca Laklavish. Athabasca Laklavish.
Yes, Mr. Speaker, to the Premier, we have lost 4,000 farmers and farm workers in Alberta during the past year. So it is a real tragedy when we started looking at the farming situation. Now, how can the Premier claim that he helped reduce input costs for farmers when last year his government raised fuel tax by 5 cents a litre?
Mr. Speaker, if the honourable member would check, you'll notice that the government protected the farmers of Alberta by providing them with the lowest energy costs in Canada, probably in North America. We also provided them with $2 billion program of low money costs, fixed 20-year lending 9%. We also provided them with the lowest costs for fertilizer. Now, Mr. Speaker, the honourable member can try and draw up whatever kind of scenes he wants. This government is providing rural Alberta, our farmers and ranchers, with the best assistance of any group in Canada, of any part of the Canadian farm economy.
Thank you. Littlebaugh.
To the Associate Minister, in terms of the counselling, is the counselling for ADC loan recipients only, or is it for the broad cross-section of farmers, and is the thrust in terms of social counselling, or is it just financial counselling?
Mr. Speaker, that's an excellent question, because that was the situation that we ran into with the ADC Enterprise Counseling Service. Farmers felt that it was only for ADC borrowers and only for those borrowers who were already in a very financially stressed situation. We had many requests from the farmers and other people representing the agricultural sector saying that this counseling and financial service and other services should be provided on a more across-the-board basis. So the program is available to any person in agriculture who needs the services, and certainly if there are other
services necessary outside of straight financial counseling, we would make that available, or at least make known to them the resources that we have available that the Premier mentioned earlier.
Main question, member for Little Bow.
Mr. Speaker, it's to the Attorney General, and it's with regards to the free trade agreement. One of the aspects in terms of the latest agreement is that countries outside of the North American continent have the opportunity of establishing businesses in Alberta or Canada, who in turn can do business in that broader North American market. Could the Minister indicate whether we have had contacts by businesses at this point in time to take advantage of that situation and prepare for the time when the free trade agreement is in place?
Mr. Speaker, the question is an important one, and of course the honourable member has indicated this free trade deal will open up an opportunity for foreign investment to come into Canada and provide opportunities for Canadian employment. Of course, we welcome that and have done so for a long time. Our government welcomes foreign investment that stays here and provides new businesses and opportunities. With respect to specific inquiries, I can indicate that my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, who is not here today, unfortunately, heads the department that is actively involved in dealing with such inquiries. I cannot, therefore, give specific examples to the honourable member, but I can assure him that the Economic Development and Trade Department is very active, both through our foreign offices and through their other contacts, in encouraging foreign investment to take advantage of this opportunity to access the North American market.
Mr. Speaker, supplementary to the Minister, interprovincial trade barriers are certainly an aspect that we have to deal with as provincial governments. The Canadian Manufacturers Association made a number of recommendations to resolve that matter. Could the Minister indicate whether the government endorses the recommendations of the Canadian Manufacturers Association, and will those recommendations be taken to the Committee of Federal and Provincial Ministers on Internal Trade?
Well, Mr. Speaker, that is an extremely important question. Alberta has, of course, taken a very strong position in support of the dismantlement of interprovincial trade barriers that now exist in our own country. And we recognize that to be very much part of the task that lies ahead of all governments in Canada in terms of making the free trade agreement between Canada and the United States work, as well as our obligations under the General Agreement on Tariffs and Trade. I would just point out to the honourable member that in the document handed out today, there are questions dealing with that, and the answer, of course, is that with respect to federal provincial initiatives to eliminate interprovincial trade barriers, I just point out, while I cannot specifically comment on the Canadian Manufacturers Association recommendations to the federal provincial task force which has been established, I remind honourable members that in Belleville, Ontario, in the spring of 1986, the trade ministers agreed upon what has now been called the Belleville Declaration. It's not all that well known, perhaps, but it's a very important one. And that is that they would engage upon a three-part process to deal with interprovincial trade barriers. The first of which was to do an inventory of existing barriers. Secondly, there was an agreement not to introduce any more interprovincial trade barriers. And thirdly, was to devise a method by which the interprovincial trade barriers could be dismantled. Now, that work was endorsed by the First Ministers at the Edmonton Premiers' Conference here in the fall of 1986, and then again by the Premiers' Conference, which was held in Vancouver. And that, of course, work has been going on, and my colleague, the Minister of Economic Development and Trade, attended a meeting towards that end last week in Ottawa, but unfortunately, not all the results were as successful as we had hoped.
Mr. Speaker, to the Minister, could the Minister indicate any special types of activities taking place within his department or other departments of government that would enhance the opportunity for Alberta businesses to take advantage of the free trade agreement?
Mr. Speaker, there are a multitude of ways that my colleague and other members, the Department of Technology, Research and Telecommunications, are working with Alberta businesses to provide them with information. We are also cooperating with the Government of Canada in their efforts to provide information to businesses. I've noted that crossing my desk in recent days, there have been a number of studies put forward by national accounting firms and business advisory firms and think tanks and economic organizations such as the C.D. Howe Institute that have provided information as to how Canadian businesses can access this wider market. And it is an extremely important role that we have to play working with the private sector, and I think that's extremely important. The honourable members raised that question.
Mr. Speaker, final supplementary. Could the minister indicate, in light of his answer, the reason for closing the Edmonton office of the Alberta Trade Representative here at the present time, in light of the fact that there was a lot of information that came from that office relative to free trade?
My colleague would have to answer that question, and I'm not entirely sure which office the honourable member is referring to, but certainly within the Department of Economic Development and Trade, the office of that department is open and is available to all members of the Assembly. I think I understand now what the honourable member is getting at. The office of the Alberta Trade Representative was closed in Edmonton because that particular office was made available to assist our government in negotiating with the federal government and other provinces with respect to the free trade agreement. Now that the trade agreement itself has been concluded, it was felt that that office should remain open in Calgary until such time as the deal had been implemented. But it was never the intention to keep the office of the Alberta Trade Representative open past the implementation of the free trade agreement. Other governmental departments, economic development and trade, technology, research, telecommunications, federal and intergovernmental affairs, will be providing the type of information that the honourable member is referring to, and I appreciate his question, but that role has been concluded, and of course, but I should add this before I conclude, Mr. Speaker. With the possibility and the very real opportunity that exists now for the provincial governments to come involved with the federal government in the next round of the GATT discussions, it is possible that that office will continue beyond the term that I just mentioned, but that yet has to be worked out with the new Minister of International Trade at the federal level.
Member for West Loch Sturgeon, supplementary.
Supplemental to the minister and the original question of where a plant locate, would you give us any earthly reason why a company coming to North America would locate in Canada? If they can locate in the U.S. and only get 10% of their product North American market countervailed, whereas if they locate in Canada, they could get 90% of the North American market countervailed. So why would any corporation, given the choice of the two countries under free trade, locate in Canada rather than in the U.S.?
Well, because, Mr. Speaker, people have faith in Canada, unlike the leader of the Liberal Party of Alberta.
Edmonton Beverly. Edmonton Beverly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. My questions today are to the Minister of Municipal Affairs. And Mr. Speaker, as a result of the first tax assessment since 1978, the homeowners of the city of Fort McMurray have seen their property rise to be the highest in the province of Alberta. In fact, some of the residents' increase has gone up as much as 40%. Mr. Speaker, the Municipal Tax Amendment Act 1988, currently before the Assembly, provides provisions for a 3-year phase-in as a result of new assessments. And I realize that might be too late to help Fort McMurray in spite of their high tax increases. To the Minister, is the Minister considering making any special exemptions for Fort McMurray residents so that their very large tax increases can be in fact phased in?
Mr. Speaker, I'm not sure
what the member means by exemptions. The municipality certainly has the ability to phase in tax increases, as the Bill 25 clarifies, that the honourable member has already alluded to. It is the municipality that also establishes the mill rate, and the municipality that determines what amount of money is required to operate civic services. There's no question that there's been a very dramatic increase in Fort McMurray, but that is a decision of the council made partially as a result of the general assessment that was carried out under the same rules that general assessments are carried out province-wide.
Well, Mr. Speaker, Fort McMurray is not the only city that's experiencing a dramatic increase in property taxes. In fact, Calgary is another city that's going to have the same problem. Would the minister consider adding a retroactive clause into Section 18 of Bill 25 so that the municipalities can in fact phase in these tax increases in 1988?
Mr. This is a plea with respect to third reading. This is not the place for having that because it's anticipation. No, sorry. Next question.
Mr. Speaker, has the minister contacted the ID of, or the Improvement District 18 and the councillors of Fort McMurray so they can begin to negotiate a new formula that's in place now relative to the tar sand plants that pay taxes to the ID, and there's a formula that is per capita formula to the city. Have you made any efforts to start negotiations in that area?
Mr. Speaker, the honourable member raises an important point with respect to Fort McMurray and the industrial tax transfer which takes place between the Improvement District and that municipality.
Time for question period has expired. May we have unanimous consent to complete this series of questions? Opposed? Carried. Thank you, Minister.
Mr. Speaker, with respect to that particular tax transfer, I discussed it with City Council of Fort McMurray last October after just being appointed Minister. I've had ongoing discussions with the member for that particular constituency, the Minister of Parks and Recreation, and as recently as yesterday, talked to the Mayor of Fort McMurray with respect to that issue on the telephone. Back in October, I asked them for the case that they would make for an increase in that tax transfer. And I'm still awaiting that particular case. I expect it to be made to me during my meeting with the Mayor of Fort McMurray and the member for that constituency later this week.
Mr. Speaker, obviously there's going to be some difficulty in getting the formula worked out. And I would suspect that perhaps, Mr. Speaker, there's a need for the parties to share that pot. There's going to be perhaps a need to increase the total pot, because I'm sure neither party is going to want to give. The ID is not going to give up their funds that they now have to Fort McMurray. So is the minister looking at the possibility of in fact expanding or increasing the tax allocation on the two tar sand plants to make more money available to the county and to the Improvement District?
Mr. Speaker, if in fact the industrial tax transfer was increased, that increase would come from the plant. So that would be the direct result of that. There are other considerations, one being whether or not the Improvement District would consider further contracts with the municipality. That would have to be determined after assessing the costs of dealing with citizens who live in Fort McMurray but work in the Improvement District and the services which the city provides to those individuals. I might say that the $60 per person industrial tax transfer is standard in most Alberta communities where such a transfer takes place, so that consideration of a change there may have implications further. However, we are sensitive to the issue in Fort McMurray. As I mentioned before, the member for that particular constituency has made representations to me, and we will explore all possibilities with the city and the mayor of that municipality to see if there's some way that we can assist with respect to the difficult increase that they have experienced in that community.
Additional supplementaries. Thank you. Time for question period. Is this a supplementary?
Speaker, Short one to the honourable member. View the Oslo project that's being discussed for a few miles farther away from Fort McMurray in the final deliberations before Oslo project is given the go-ahead. Does the Premier or the Minister sit down with the town and work out just what the tax transfer will be before they give the final go-ahead?
Mr. Speaker, with respect to any future projects, one could not predetermine the tax transfer because you'd have to assess what particular impact that project would have on the town, what services would be required, and what is necessary in that respect. I should underline, though, with regards to this particular circumstance, that the City of Fort McMurray will later this year be getting quite an increase in the AMPO grant program. I will let the Mayor know that shortly, and of what that figure will be precisely. We will, as the member for Fort McMurray has requested, be discussing other options as well to look at that circumstance. I do have to outline, though, Mr. Speaker, that the tax increase is something that's within civic responsibility. They've had a difficult situation because of the fluctuation of the economy in that particular city, and we, while recognizing its totally civic responsibility, will do everything we can to assist the citizens of that part of our province.
Cypress Ringcliffe.
Supplementary question to the Minister. I wonder if, because of the rapid increases that happen in towns such as Fort McMurray and taxation, if the Minister would consider moving on to government bills and orders, Bill number 208, an act to amend the Municipal Taxation Act that would allow a yearly review so that we wouldn't be subject to big increases every 8 years.
Mr. Speaker, the member is very perceptive in defining a base problem, which is the time between general assessments and the fluctuations that does cause. That's not the total problem in Fort McMurray, but it's a very large part of it. We hope that sometime in the future the intent of Bill 208 will in fact come into being, but that will take the computerization and sophisticated development of our assessment systems throughout all Alberta communities. We look forward to working with Alberta communities in moving in that direction, as a couple of our Alberta municipalities already have.
Time for question period has expired. The Chair has received notification of one point of order by Edmonton Belmont. Then we have the request under Standing Order 40 by Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. During question period today, during the exchange between the Premier and the Leader of the official opposition, the Premier said that the opposition wanted labour unrest in the province of Alberta. Well, Mr. Speaker, Beauchesne prevents me from calling that statement exactly what it is, but I can assure all members of the Assembly that nobody on any side of the Legislative Assembly wants labour unrest in our province. For the Premier to suggest that I would suggest a violation of Section 23I of our standing orders, and I would ask the Premier to consider withdrawing such a remark.
Well, the Chair will just have to look at what the Blues do indeed say in this regard, or therefore we'll have to take it under consideration. Standing Order 40, Vegreville.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Class, Getty.
Speaking to the urgency of the motion that has been circulated to all honourable members, that's the provision of Standing Order 40, Honourable Attorney General. It's well understood by all members of the Assembly the various problems that farmers in the province face with markets and prices and finances, and I just think that the innovative decision of the Edmonton Journal to help diversify the agricultural economy by using canola-based ink to print their newspapers is a positive step, albeit not a large step, but it's a positive step, and I think it's one that deserves the commendation of members of the Legislative Assembly for their attempts to help farmers, help the communities they support, and to engage in an effective program of import substitution.
Under Standing Order 40, there is a request. Is there unanimous consent to agree to urgency? Opposed? Orders of the day. Hold it. Point of order.